Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to have so many of you on board with us again this evening. We're always amazed, I think I probably say this every time, but we're always amazed at how many people do join us for these presentations that we do. This evening, Bret is going to be chatting to us about Svalbard. I suspect many of you have been to Svalbard before, and I suspect many of you have travelled with Bret, who is one of our many leaders, but Bret has a particular and unique set of skills, which we're obviously delighted about. Bret's the most fantastic photographer, as you will undoubtedly see during the course of this presentation. If you are unaware of it, then you will be very well aware by the end of it, by the end of Bret's presentation. Bret leads trips all around the world. I'm sure Bret would be very happy to chat to you about that if you would like to, but not only to Svalbard, but also to Finland and various other places around Europe. And he and I share a great love of Africa, and particularly Zambia, where Bret leads a lot of photographic trips. And I suspect many of you will be familiar with our brochures. Gosh, remember those from the old days? But Bret does all of our brochure design work, and is a key member of our marketing team. So a very important person within the Natural Travel Collection and Wildlife Worldwide. And Bret, as I say, is going to be chatting this evening about Svalbard, which he and I have both visited. It really is one of the most wonderful places on Earth. Of course, it's one of the last refuges for polar bears, amongst other things. It's very rich with bird colonies, and has a tremendous population of Arctic fox and all sorts of other lovely things, which I know you're going to be seeing this evening. It will also play host to our Festival of Wildlife, which is at the end of June next year, on board a lovely vessel which we've chartered for the event, which of course was due to have taken place last year, but for all the reasons that everybody knows was unable to take place last year. And of course it was also due to take place this year. But anyway, it will happen next year, and we're very excited about that. It's happening at the end of June and beginning of July next year, which is precisely when Bret went, when he went a couple of years ago. So so the photographs that you will be seeing will be entirely representative of the kind of conditions that we'll have when we go in a couple of years' time. That's about right, isn't it, Bret?
Yep, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah, and fingers crossed we'll see everything that you saw when you were travelling as well. So Bret, before I hand over to you, I will just mention to all the lovely people that we've got on board that they are very, very welcome to pose questions to us, to you and I, via the chat, which you will see at the bottom of your screen, which if you're on a computer, or Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen as well. I think I'm right in saying if you're on a handheld device or an iPad, it's at the top of your screen, but I'm on a computer, so I can't tell you that for absolute certainty. But anyway, do please ask us questions on chat and Q&A. We'd be delighted to answer them. Frankly, whether about Svalbard or anything else. But it was kind of logical to ask questions about Svalbard. And on the assumption that I remember to do it, we will ask you a question. I will fire a question to you guys towards the end of the presentation at the beginning of Q&A. But Bret, I will hide at this point and mute myself, and I'll hand over to you if I may.
No problem at all. Thanks very much, Chris.
Pleasure. Chat to you later.
See you in a bit. So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining us once again, as Chris has already said. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Bret, and as Chris said, I lead a range of photography tours all around the world, and I have been very privileged to visit some remarkable places, including Svalbard. I think the first things first is that not everybody knows where Svalbard is. So I always like to start when I'm talking about it just by giving you a little bit of an idea as to the geography, sort of in terms of its positioning on the globe. So, go forwards. There we go. So Svalbard is pretty much due north of Norway, and from a political point of view, it is indeed part of Norway, although it is an autonomous region. So it's sort of self-governing, with support from the Norwegian sort of mainland, so to speak. And this map here is sort of a little bit warped in terms of scale because of the way the curvature of the Earth. So I've done it sort of as a globe rather than as a sort of a flat map, so to speak. And what you'll be able to see is that it is an awful long way north, and actually just to the north of Svalbard itself is about 80 degrees in latitude. So it really is an incredibly remote archipelago and a wildlife lover's paradise for both birds and mammals, and even plants as well. If you're into your botany, there are some unique botanical opportunities in Svalbard, plants that you'll find nowhere else in the world. So it really is a very special place. And somewhere where I can't sort of recommend enough, really. It is truly spectacular. So I'm going to give you a bit of an idea now about sort of the actual lay of the land in Svalbard on this little map. And we fly into Longyearbyen, so hopefully you can see on the left of your screens is the island of Spitsbergen. The island of Spitsbergen is home to the capital, which is Longyearbyen. And this is a pretty sort of, I would say, sizable settlement for an Arctic community. It's actually got a university, a hospital, etc. But in real terms, it's the size of a village. It's really not that large, but there's all the amenities that you'd expect from a capital of a region. And this is where we start. So we fly into Longyearbyen, and this is where we will pick up our boat as well. So it's a wonderful little town, sort of a frontier town, I suppose. And it's a great place to see wildlife as well. There's loads of stuff on offer. And typically what happens is you'll leave Longyearbyen and then head north. But it depends very much on the ice conditions and the weather as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on the journey that I did, which was a clockwise circumnavigation of the island of Spitsbergen. And I was also very lucky to sort of explore some sort of more remote areas and some other sort of islands, I suppose. So Sudneset and Doritneset, which are on the southeastern edge of Spitsbergen itself. So what we did was we went from Longyearbyen and we headed north to the most northerly permanent settlement, I think it is on Earth, Ny-Ålesund. It's also home to the most northerly post office on Earth. So if you want to get a pretty unique postage opportunity, that's your place to do it. So buy a postcard and pop it in the post box. It's in a place called Kongsfjorden, and it's a great introduction to the wildlife here. And it's a wonderful way to sort of start the trip. So I'm going to start off with Longyearbyen and just give you an idea of what's on offer, and then I'm going to whisk you up to Kongsfjorden and to Ny-Ålesund. So Longyearbyen itself, as I said, is a small sort of community, but has everything you need. To be honest, in summer, it's a little bit bleak. It's sort of quite, well, a lot of the snow has melted, and actually there's snow all around you, but the town itself is clear of snow. But it's a great place to go and see some sort of wildlife which you might not get so close to later on a trip. And that includes things like Arctic terns. And now Arctic terns can be quite aggressive when you're on foot in particular. And you might be wondering what this charming gentleman is wearing on his back. He's wearing a pole. And the theory is that if you're walking along near a tern colony, they will attack the highest point. So you pick up these poles and you walk along a pathway, which you're allowed to. In this case, it's a causeway. And the idea is that they will attack the top of the pole. It doesn't work. And the locals laugh at you because you look like an absolute idiot walking along with a pole sticking out of your back. But it's a great way to work out who the tourists are nonetheless. So from there, there's so much on offer, there really is. But it's all about sort of getting on that ship, on that boat. And hopefully you'll start to see some amazing wildlife pretty quickly. There are eider ducks all around the boat itself. And before long, when you're out in the water channels, hopefully we'll see our first cetaceans. Svalbard cetaceans are incredibly rich. And actually within 10 minutes of leaving the shore, we were actually in the middle of a safety briefing when, believe it or not, a blue whale was spotted just off the bow of the ship. So this photograph here, hopefully you can see a large grey lump to the left of the sailboat. And actually, this is my first ever blue whale sighting. So you always have to have your eyes open and be aware to sort of drop whatever you're doing and go and see what's on offer, because it's got so much potential to throw up surprises along the way. And as you're out on the water, particularly where sort of it's open water, or there's only sort of spread pack ice, open pack ice, what you'll find is that actually you'll get a whole sort of gathering of seabirds that will follow you. They'll follow the wake of the ship, because the ship is turning up nutrients, and those nutrients attract fish, and the birds obviously like to eat the fish. So you'll always be accompanied by fulmars, these guys, and a wealth of other birds too. And this gives you an idea of the scale of some of the landscapes here. So this is just outside Ny-Ålesund, that town I was telling you about. You might actually be able to see it in the background on the right-hand side of the picture, on the opposite side of the fjord. And we made a landing here, and we were quite quickly treated to things that I'd never seen before, which includes the endemic Svalbard reindeer. But more importantly, I would say this area is fantastic for bird life, and in particular skuas. In one day, you can see Arctic skua, Pomeranian skua, and long-tailed skua quite easily in the Ny-Ålesund area. So it's a fantastic place to go to see these amazing birds, and it's also good for sea ducks too. I've just had someone say, what time of year do you spot blue whales or Spitsbergen? I'll answer that now, because it's a really good question. You can see them throughout the whole of the summer. Basically, what they do is they come up from the temperate seas into the Arctic seas in our summer months to make the most of the rich sort of plankton blooms, and they come up and they feed in these incredibly rich waters. So from sort of May into June, all the way through to August, September, they are there. And then once winter sort of hits, they'll move slightly further south again. So they are there at the time that we run trips here. So as I said, sea ducks here are particularly good. Long-tailed duck are commonly seen, and these guys are commonly seen as well, which is the eider. And you might be able to see in this image, these are all males, by the way. The eider duck you saw before was a female, the one on a nest. But there's one on the left-hand side of this flock with a green head and a bright yellow bill, and that's a king eider. And you do see these sometimes mixed in with the flocks. It's really quite spectacular to see these birds. Sometimes you can get close, but more typically you'll see them as they're flying along, such as this. Whilst you're on the boat again, it's not just the larger birds, you'll see other birds as well, which include guillemots, puffins even, little auks and things like that. This is a black guillemot, beautiful white wings and a black body with these vivid red feet, so very easy to identify compared to the Brunix guillemot, which is another species you find here. As I said, the skuas are really sort of common and easy to see and quite approachable. And that's one of the things that makes Svalbard so special, is just the fact you can get this amazing proximity to the wildlife, which you just don't get to experience in so much of the world. So from this bit there, we've done Longyearbyen to Ny-Ålesund and Kongsfjorden. And then what we're going to do is we're going to head north still. And hopefully in the top left of your screen, you can see a little name and a black dot that says Fuglesången. And Fuglesången is one of my favorite places in the Svalbard archipelago. It's an island actually off Spitsbergen itself. And its literal translation is birdsong. And the reason for that is because it's home to these guys. It's got a colony of little auks. And little auks are tiny. They're not much bigger than a can of Coke, perhaps, a soft drinks can. Incredibly charismatic. And they have absolutely no fear of people. So what you can do is you can find a colony such as this was in a scree slope, and you can basically sit yourself down, and then they'll actually come and investigate you. They'll come and keep an eye on you and see what you're up to. You don't need long telephoto lenses here either. You can have pretty short telephoto lenses. Even your phone, you can get some pretty spectacular pictures with. So it really is very special indeed. One thing that's important to say is that when you're in Svalbard, obviously you need the right sort of clothing, and typically we'll make wet landings, which means that you will use a Zodiac and we'll go up onto a shallow beach, and you might just have to jump in a few inches of water. Don't worry, you'll be provided with expedition welly boots, which are very warm, very comfortable, and you'll then just sort of wade ashore a few feet, and then you're pretty much into prime wildlife territory straight away. So, I mean, I love the little auks. They really are one of my favorite birds. so incredibly inquisitive and characterful as well. You know, there aren't many birds, I don't think, that are more charismatic than the auks. The puffins and the little auks are very closely related indeed. And this is them in flight. So they kind of look a bit like, I suppose, sort of penguins, really, flying penguins, and they skim the water, and in beautiful lighting, you can get some amazing pictures as well. It's also really important to say that there is 24 hours of daylight in the summer months in Svalbard. And it's very, very important to try and get some sleep when you can. Because if you have your dinner and then you go out on deck or you go up to the bridge, you can quite easily spend 4 or 5 hours watching the horizon, seeing what's coming, watching the ice patterns, the mountains as they go by. And before you know it, it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got to be up again at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning to go out, have breakfast and go out on your activity. So it's really important to have that self-discipline and make sure you go to bed, or alternatively you just don't sleep for a week, which is what some people prefer to do. But it is an amazing experience to be able to experience sort of 24 hours daylight, and it makes photography a dream sort of destination, because there's just always light on offer. The landscapes are pretty spectacular, and one of the things I said when I went to Svalbard was, every time I got to a new fjord, I said that this was the most beautiful place I'd ever been. And then the only issue was the next day I'd have to retract that statement, and say, actually, now this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. But Fuglesången is genuinely one of the most spectacular places, with stunning mountain peaks and glaciers around you. And it's also usually home to some icebergs as well, which have carved off the glacier. And what's great is with the guides here, you'll learn about the different types of icebergs. So there are different names and classifications. And this one here on this screen is called a growler. And one of the reasons it's called a growler is because it has air that escapes and it makes a growling sound. But you might be able to see the boat's not gone right up to it. And that's because they actually have a likelihood of flipping. And they're an unstable iceberg. And that's why the gas escapes and then they flip over. So it's really important to know the difference. So you have to trust the guides. And if they say, no, this is as close as we can go, it's for a very good reason. So you can sometimes get a little bit close to Arctic terns from the boat than you can when you're on foot. In terms of photography anyway, I mean, they'll attack you, but obviously that's not great for photography. But what they do is they'll quite often rest on a little bit of an ice floe, or alternatively on a rocky outcrop, sort of an island in a fjord. And if you're on a Zodiac, what you can do is you can sort of slowly turn the engine off and make your way towards them, and you can get amazing photographic opportunities. The same can be said for seals as well. When you're on a boat, they're quite relaxed and quite approachable. This is a bearded seal, beautiful whiskers, very easy to identify, and also the sheer size of them. These guys are one of the largest seals you'll see here, and absolutely beautiful. This one is molting. It's just losing his winter coat, going to his summer coat, hence the sort of funny mottled effect on him. And this was actually on an ice floe, and we were taking this from the ship itself. And that's quite an amazing thing to be able to get so close to a large animal. It's with about a 600mm focal length for those that are interested in photography. But the reason we started to see this is because we started to see more ice. The further north you go, obviously, the more ice there usually is. That's not always true, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. But what it does mean is that the further north you go, you get more ice and more seals, because that's what the seals like to haul out on. And when you get seals, there is obviously a chance of seeing polar bears, because that is their primary food source. So the seals themselves, the bearded seal is one of the larger ones, so one of the ones that the polar bears would struggle to sort of take, but nonetheless they do try, particularly in winter when they're coming out of breathing holes. So when we started to see seals such as this guy, we knew there was a good chance of seeing a polar bear. And our first polar bear came at about 79 degrees north, and we actually ended up going all the way up to 81 degrees north and sitting in the pack ice overnight. It really is an incredible, honestly, I don't have the words. It's an incredible experience to be able to see a polar bear in the distance on pack ice or on an ice floe. It kind of takes your breath away. And at first they're a tiny little dot, and then you slowly get closer and hopefully you'll be able to get out into the zodiacs and sort of get much closer and get a sort of an eye level view of them. But what's amazing is watching them move from ice floe to ice floe across the ice pack and seeing them try and hunt. I have had another question quickly, which someone has asked, which is how many people come on, how many people are on the ship. What I will do is I'll get to that at the end, just because it makes it a little bit easier to answer sort of bulk questions at the end. So unless it's relevant to what I'm talking about at the time, I'll just make sure we answer it at the end, just to let you all know. So it really is a fantastic privilege to see these magnificent mammals, and the sheer size of them is absolutely incredible. And a lot of these shots are actually taken very late at night, about 11 p.m. from the main ship itself. So it gives you an idea of the ability to get closer even on the larger vessel. But you can see the ice here is quite close to the shore, and we're just on the northern edge here of the landmass of Spitsbergen. And the ice is incredibly variable in each year. And part of the reason for that is to do with currents and not only temperature as well. It is very varied. So it's important to note that just because I've been able to do this exact itinerary, it might change year on year. Again, I'll come on to that in more detail. But again, where you get sort of the ice and things like that, the walruses are more comfortable, but there are also other specific walrus haulouts further around the coastline, which we'll get to. And the walruses are pretty large and pretty smelly. It's important to say that. And they haven't got the best hygiene. You might be able to see that this ice has got quite a green tinge to it in places underneath where they're sat. And that is because they do make a bit of a mess when they haul themselves out. So that's all around the northern coast, just east from Fuglesången. There is also the Monaco Glacier, which is particularly famous, which is in that large fjord just to the southeast of Fuglesången. Unfortunately, because of the ice, we couldn't actually get there on my trip. The whole fjord had completely blocked up. And although the vessel is ice strengthened, which is really important to note, it isn't an icebreaker. So if there's thick sea ice, you cannot pass through it. You can maneuver through ice, but you can't sort of break your way through thick ice. So what we did was we went from Fuglesången around the northern tip. We were actually the first vessel to do that, and it was the first week of July when I was there, and we went all the way around the northern tip to Alkfjord. And Alkfjord is synonymous and famous for its huge bird colonies, but it's also another fantastic place to explore the Arctic tundra. And there's a great bay here where, if the ice allows, you can pull in, you can come ashore, and you can get incredibly close to quite a few Arctic Svalbard reindeer, and there's unbelievable variety of plants here as well. So if you have an expert botanist on board, they will be able to help you identify the unique species that are found on Svalbard, such as the Svalbard rose, beautiful little flower that sort of survives in these incredibly harsh environments, and only obviously flowers in the summer months. But the main focus here is definitely the bird colonies of Alkfjord. It's home to brunette guillemots, and as you can see here, it is vast. There are hundreds and thousands of birds flying at one time. The noise is incredible. The smell can be pretty remarkable. And if you're wondering why the rocks are black and white, it is simply because the white is the guano, their poo, that has streaked and stained the cliffside. So it's a mesmerizing sight, and you can get incredibly close to the birds as well. You'll find lots of them rafting in the water. They're resting, and they're a really beautiful bird, and not at all afraid of the zodiacs, and they'll swim all around you, quite content with your presence. But it gives you an idea of the way that they nest here. They nest by laying an egg directly onto the rock, and then they incubate it on the rock itself. And then once the chick is hatched, obviously the adults are going backwards and forwards to feed the young. The air is just a maelstrom, to be honest. It is remarkable. And when we were here, I said to one of the guides, my guide on my Zodiac, would we be able to see Arctic fox here? And he said, oh yeah, they're here. I'll keep an eye out for them. I said, oh, that'd be amazing, because I'd never seen one, something I'd always wanted to see. He then says to me, oh, there's one up there. And I said, where? And he said, oh, up there. And he didn't have binoculars or anything like that. And I was looking with my binoculars, couldn't see anything. And for those of you that can't see it, I'm just going to see if I can actually show you by doing a little circle here. Should be a spotlight. There's a green circle, hopefully in the middle. In that green circle is an Arctic fox. And absolutely remarkable that he saw it with the naked eye, because this little brown fox was on a brown cliff in brown grass, surrounded by 300,000 guillemots. Unbelievable sighting, bit well skill, I suppose, just to be able to see it. And then, hang on, I'm just going to get rid of this quickly and try. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I had to get the control back. So we were then, oh, no, I need to get rid of this. Uh-oh, I have a circle. Let me just remove the annotation. There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. So then we were able to spend some time following the Arctic fox, and we actually managed to watch it try and hunt. So here, obviously, it's a lot more visible. We managed to get a bit closer, and it'd come a little bit further down the cliffs. But you can see here it's looking up, trying to work out a way to get an easy meal, hoping for a chick or an egg that's come loose. But their dexterity and ability to climb was absolutely incredible. They were so agile, sort of working their way up almost sheer vertical cliff faces, finding tiny little paths, little ledges that they could stand on. Absolutely remarkable, and something I'll never forget. But after we went to Alkfjord, we had the incredible privilege to go to the fjord on the opposite side on the island of Nordaustlandet. So that island to the northeast of Spitsbergen that hopefully you saw earlier on. And Nordaustlandet is one giant ice cap, and Valenberg Fjorden, which is the fjord that sort of runs into the heart of the island, is normally impassable because of the ice from this ice sheet. It's a giant glacier, basically. But on this particular trip, the way the currents had worked had actually sucked the ice out of the fjord, and we actually went in the ship. And because of that, we were actually one of the few ships with a sort of a high-tech depth sensor sonar system, and we were actually able to help plot the depths in the fjord. So it will all be certified and ratified, obviously. But you know, it was amazing to be part of what really felt like an expeditionary sort of voyage, I suppose, and that's something that is really important to press home, that this isn't just your typical gentle cruise. It is a proper expedition. It's got people on it who are at the top of their game, scientists, guides as well, the skippers, the ship's captain, the crew are all unbelievable, and this expedition is an expedition of a lifetime. Around the sort of the face of this amazing ice cap, this giant glacier, you'll find a lot of birds again feeding on the crustaceans, which in turn are feeding on the algae under the ice. So that means you get black guillemots and a load of fish as well, and the fish will attract other things such as seals. But this gives you an idea of the scale of this place. So this zodiac is probably 100 to 200 yards away from the front of the glacier, the ice cap, and probably at sort of, once you're next to it, it's 50 to 100 feet high, depending on where you are along the front. It's absolutely incredible, and carving is very regular. So large chunks of ice are coming off, which is why we have to keep the distance, obviously. So as I said, because of these ice flows and the rich waters, you will get seals here. And this is another bearded seal, but he looks a little bit different from the one I showed you earlier on. And that's simply because the bay here, the fjord, is actually very rich in iron ore. So every time the seal is diving for food, and these guys are particularly specialists in mollusks, they're actually staining their head on the seafloor. But you can see probably that this guy has got one side, his right on our left of the screen, that's particularly sort of impressive moustache, his beard, and on one side it's a little bit pathetic. So when we got a little bit closer, the side of the beard looked absolutely fine. But as we got closer still, we noticed he had this large scar from his nostril and a lot of sort of damage to one side, and these scars on the head as well. And our guide was actually a local guide on this particular day. And he said that what has happened is that this seal has probably come up in the winter into a breathing hole. And as it's come up through the ice to the breathing hole, a polar bear has been waiting and actually hooked it by the nostril with its large paws and tried to pull it out of the water. but the sheer weight of the seal probably saved its life, and it managed to pull itself free, unfortunately with some damage. But looking at the size of him and the weight, the seal was absolutely fine, no long-term ill effects, and their immune systems are incredible. Another amazing sight is definitely the walruses. And so after we went to Wallenbergfjorden, we headed south to those islands, to the southeast of Spitsbergen itself. And these islands, Sundersnet and Dorritneset, are one of the best places to see walruses. There are some big walrus haulouts here, and we were able to get incredibly close on land on the shingle sort of beach. And it's only when you get on foot that you really appreciate the scale of these pinnipeds. They are huge. They are genuinely, I don't even know how to describe them. They are just magnificent animals, absolute beasts. And they're quite relaxed around human presence. These guys haven't been hunted for a long, long time. So most of the population is relatively approachable. The guides will obviously tell you how close to get and ensure that the animals aren't stressed. And so it's always about animal welfare, and that's really important. But my guide said to me, would you like to get particularly close? And I said, well, only obviously if it's safe to do so and that the animal's not going to be distressed. And he said, okay, well, there's a way to do it. If you'd like to come with me, we'll go and stand in the water. So I went to stand in the water, and this walrus started to come towards us, but quickly sort of made a beeline away. And then it sort of got into a bit of a barney with a neighbor, and they thrashed around in the water for quite a bit. And being at eye level and seeing this, your heart's obviously beating quite a lot. And then our guide said to us, oh, well, why don't you start to paddle in the water, a bit like a duck, go up and down. And so anyway, we stood there looking quite bemused as to what we were doing. And what we were doing is recreating a mollusk burying itself in the sand, in the shingle. And so a walrus decided to come and investigate. And what we hadn't realized is that just off the shore was a large drop off. So the walruses, this is why they haul out there. It means they can get quick access to quite deep water, a great escape in case a polar bear comes. But it meant that a walrus could literally swim right up to us, and sort of stare at us in the face. And I just loved it because you got to see all the details. So these amazing whiskers, which helps them find the mollusks in the sediment on the seafloor. And just the proximity of the encounter was incredibly special indeed. In actual fact, our guide had a GoPro on a pole, and he decided to sort of point it at it. And the walrus did actually try and eat it. It didn't succeed, obviously. We didn't let it. But he has some amazing footage, which I'm still trying to get all this time on, of a walrus sort of about to inhale a GoPro before it gets removed quite sharpishly. But to give you an idea of the size, these guys were standing at my height, looking me in the eye, and their tusks are well over 50 centimeters long, easily a meter long on large individuals. Just the most remarkable encounter, and such a privilege to be able to get so close. And if you're worried about whether they're stressed or not by our presence, hopefully this photograph will ease those concerns. As you can see, it's very relaxed indeed, having a little bit of a scratch. And if you're wondering what all the pink is, they are little scars, obviously, but it's actually also where the blood vessels close to the skin are sort of helping the walrus cool down, because for them it's relatively warm in the summer months. And I know someone has asked about temperature, and that's actually an important thing as well. It's massively varied, so it's very hard to give you an answer. On my particular trip, the temperature ranged from anywhere between -10 and +5. And it really depends on fjord to fjord, winds, obviously the weather on the day itself. You can get heavy snow, you can get gorgeous sunshine. So it's a very hard one to call, but what you need to do is wear layers. And obviously if it's warm, you remove some layers, and if the temperature starts to drop, you add layers again. But gloves are very important, so make sure you do wear a really good set of gloves, and socks are very important too. You are usually provided, well, you are on our trips, with a jacket when you get on board, when you sort of join the cruise itself. So from the southern islands of Sudneset and Dorritneset, we headed all the way around the south. So I was actually able to complete the circumnavigation of the island of Svalbard. The eastern coastline, you can see there's that sort of quite jagged but straight coastline down the southeast of Spitsbergen, you don't really make many landings there. And that's because primarily it's vertical cliffs. So it's not really an area where it's easy to access the shoreline. The western fjords and the northern fjords in the northeast are much more accessible by Zodiac than sort of the eastern coast. So what we did is we headed down south and we headed to the fjord called Hornsund, which is the most southerly large fjord on the island of Spitsbergen. And by this point, I'd assumed I wasn't going to see any more polar bears. And I said to my guide, you know, I'm a bit gutted. We've only seen a few bears, and that changes on every trip. Sometimes people see, you know, upwards of 50 bears. Sometimes you get a few. It's incredibly varied each trip, and it's just luck. There's no real skill involved. It's just the bears have to be where you are at the right time, obviously. So anyway, we crossed into Hornsund, and I remember getting into the fjord itself and just saying, this is genuinely the most beautiful place I've ever been. And I think it still is probably up there as one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. It is utterly, utterly beautiful. And the landscapes all around here are just remarkable. So before we got to Hornsund, we actually made another landing. Sorry, I forgot to mention this bit. And this was a great place for wading birds in particular, including what we like to call the grey phalarope, but in breeding plumage, it's this lovely russet colour. And it's unusual because actually the females are more colourful than the males. So this is a male looking very handsome nonetheless, but the females are noticeably more colourful. So here's a female, and actually the roles are pretty much reversed in the fact that the males usually raise the chicks, and the female will go around multiple males and lay eggs with numerous partners. So it sort of roles are reversed for the phalarope. But because you get these birds, these wading birds here, and obviously breeding birds, including geese as well sometimes, you quite often find Arctic fox. And this guy hadn't quite got the memo that summer had already arrived, and was still desperately trying to get rid of his very obvious white winter coat. Makes it quite hard to approach wildlife as a predator when you are bright white in a green and brown landscape. But I'm sure in a couple of days' time, all of this coat would have come out, and its hunting chances would have been a lot easier. Luckily, they probably cached some food, so it wasn't doing too badly. But we kind of kept our distance so not to disturb it, and let it go back to sleep again. So Hornsund obviously was our next stop. And as I said, we were incredibly hopeful of seeing polar bears at the north. I never expected to see any in the south of the island, but boy was I wrong. Hornsund really delivered, and actually our guide said that this was a quality bear, and he's seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of polar bears, and he said this was one of the most spectacular sightings he'd ever had, just because of the landscape we were in. And Hornsund is a fjord surrounded by high peak mountains, vast glaciers, and just amazing vistas. And to have a polar bear sort of walking around in the middle of it on a rocky outcrop really was a real privilege. It was quite incredible. And here you really can see the towering mountains behind, these sort of staggeringly tall peaks coming straight out of the ocean. And this is the bear behind me. Obviously I've inverted it for you, but this is the shot itself, and this is what I call my Fox's Glacier bear. Those Fox's Glacier mints are sort of this scene really, that a bear stood on top of a rock surveying its domain is something I will never ever forget. And with this, I always like to throw in a little conservation story, and that's about the ivory gull and climate change as well. And obviously polar bears are pretty reliant on ice for most of their food. It's where the seals haul out, where the seals come up out of ice holes. So without the ice, the polar bears struggle to hunt the seals. And they're pretty much carrion eaters in the summer months if they haven't managed to follow the ice. So if they've got stranded in the south, for example, what happens is they'll revert to sort of eating eider duck eggs, hunting geese maybe. You know, they might catch the odd seal if they're lucky, but it's a much harder time. And the ivory gull goes hand in hand with this. The ivory gull is completely reliant on the polar bear, and that's because it's a carrion bird, and it pretty much the entirety of its diet comes from polar bear kills. So if the polar bears aren't making kills, the ivory gull is struggling to eat. Obviously, sometimes whales and things like that will wash up on the seashore. Not only are they a godsend for the polar bears, but they are for the ivory gulls too. So it's a really important thing to say that with sort of climate change and global warming, not only are you affecting sort of the polar bears, which depend on the ice itself, you're affecting the species that then subsequently depend on the polar bears for their food. So it's a really complicated ecosystem in the Arctic, and it's not a traditional pyramid like we're all used to, with that sort of keystone predator, this apex predator at the very, very top. As I said, the fjord itself really is quite spectacular. And if the sort of the cloud cover comes in low, it produces this amazing light, these different blues and yellows, soft hues. But when the clouds disappear, these amazing rich blue hues come back again. Excuse me. And this gives you an sorry, gives you an idea of the vastness of the landscapes here. And this is the ship I was on. And typically we will never go on any large ships. And I know this looks particularly large, but actually we only go on ships where we can all get out at the same time. And that's really, really important, because it means that nobody is stuck on the boat whilst others go to shore. You don't want to be stuck on a boat whilst other people are making landings. That's not how we operate. So we only ever go for these sort of smaller expedition style vessels, rather than these large cruise ships that you sometimes see advertised as Svalbard cruises. That's just not us. But it gives you an idea of the spectacular landscape. And this is sort of what it's like to cruise on a Zodiac through the ice floes, slowly making our way through this spectacular landscape. And so I'm going to come to an end now. I hopefully have inspired you to visit this amazing place. And this is the sort of the final shot that I have from Hornsund itself. It's just one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I really can't recommend it enough. So if you can join us next year on our Festival of Wildlife, that would be fantastic. I'm going. I don't know whether Chris is. Are you going, Chris?
I'm planning to, Bret. Yes, unless it's vetoed by a member of my family or someone else. But yeah.
So
yeah,
it's
definitely
an amazing time of year to travel, and I can't recommend it enough. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, now is the time to send them if you haven't already. I know some of you have, so thank you for that. And please do let us have any questions you can think of. We'll do our very best to answer them. So thank you very much.
Bret, that was typically fantastic. Thank you. Just wonderful, absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I just love Svalbard. It's such an amazing place, and actually, curiously, relatively close to us, isn't it? But a completely different environment, and just so wonderful. That was really cool. Thank you. So, in addition to the questions that we've got, questions we've got on Q&A, which obviously you and I can both see, I've got a number of questions that have come over via email. So I thought I might just kind of maybe amalgamate sort of two or three of them. One that I thought would be that you touched on in the middle of the talk, but I thought I could pose a related question that came via email, relates to expedition clothing. Because obviously that relates to weather and the climate and so on. Someone has said, will I need to buy lots of expedition clothing if I go on a voyage with you to Svalbard? I thought that was a good question, probably something that a lot of people would like to know the answer to.
So I mean, on our trip next year, to give you an idea, when you join the ship itself, you actually get a waterproof winter jacket, which is designed specifically for an Arctic expedition. But typically you will need to have things like fleeces, thermals, winter gloves, obviously, and usually a merino wool gloves to go underneath, because you don't always want the big thick gloves on. Really good socks are one of my biggest sort of recommendations. Really nice, comfortable socks, because you don't want to be in boots with sort of socks that give you blisters or things like that. So really nice warm socks, and sometimes even layer your socks. I mean, that's personally what I do. I wear a thin layer of socks, and then I actually put thick ones on over the top, and it means your feet are always toasty and you don't get cold, particularly when you're stood still, because that's, or on a boat, it's when you get cold. But in terms of trousers, what I usually recommend is a nice pair of winter waterproof trousers, or alternatively, if you've got ski snowboarding trousers, they can also work very well. That's kind of my recommendation. So you don't need to go and buy thousands of pounds worth of expedition clothing. You just need to be sensible with, think of a really cold winter's day in the UK. And if you dress for that, you're pretty well equipped usually. Sunglasses, very important. And a nice warm hat as well, I will say.
And you mentioned the boots.
Absolutely. And I mean, some people like to take their own, that's personal choice, but I mean, the boots on the ship are perfectly adequate. And if you give us the sizings before, they'll make sure that they have them on board, obviously. Another option some people go for, which I don't personally do in Svalbard, is wear snow boots. And that's because of the wet landings. I just think they're not quite as high as the welly boots. But obviously they're very good and very warm. But I think the boots are a little bit better just for the Zodiac landings, the ship boots.
Yeah, right? I'm with you on that one. And warmer too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my snow boots I love, but I use those more for sort of snow rather than the wet landings and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So what else have we got here? Well, lots, of course. So Amanda, hopefully we've answered your question about outer gear. So in essence, no, they don't. The vessel doesn't provide the bottoms. It's the jacket that they provide. But worth, as Bret says, worth getting something neat for your leggings, as it were. So Louise has asked whether there's anyone on the ship to assist with photography, but I'm going to elaborate on that question as well with one that's come by email, and say and pose a related question and say, what photographic gear should I take with me? I guess it depends how enthusiastic you are about photography, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll have more than all of us put together, probably.
So, I mean, it is a really hard question. In terms of photography, usually there is someone on board, even if it's not one of our dedicated sort of like our festival next year. I'm on board next year. I think, is Mark Cardy on it?
Yes, Mark should be on board.
Yeah, Mark should be on it. So he's obviously a fantastic photographer. But usually there will be a couple of people on our trips, particularly, that will be a specialist in wildlife photography. So they'll be on hand. But if you decide to do a tailor-made version, there is still usually a photographer on board as part of the expedition team who can help as well. So that's important to note. And in terms of gear, it's a really tough one. One of the slight issues is on the flights to Svalbard, you have limited hand luggage. So think of African safari styles. What I do is I wear my winter coat on the plane, even though it's summer in Europe and you end up melting. And the reason for that is winter coats are fantastic for holding about 10 kilos worth of camera gear. So you can fit cameras in your pockets because they're designed for big gloves. You can fit batteries and small lenses and you name it, you can fit in it. So then what I do is I basically have my camera bag with a long telephoto lens. So something, I would say in Svalbard, you need probably 300 or a 500, something like that. And then you really want sort of a wide angle because the landscapes are pretty spectacular. And if you have space, try and get that middle range zoom. Something like a 70 to 200 is always particularly good. If you've got something like a 100 to 400, then that's fantastic because it ticks loads of boxes, or an 80 to 400. But then you need that wide angle to go with that zoom telephoto as well, I would say. And if you want primes and you're prepared to lug it around, then go for it.
So it can get heavy, right?
Yeah, I mean, my bag, I think when I went, I didn't adhere to the hand luggage rules. And I typically got on the plane and there was no overhead luggage space left. And the stewardess had to put it in the captain's cabin because it was so heavy. So,
photographer.
Try and pack light if you can. But we're not known to pack light photographers.
No, I agree. Now, look, as you pointed out earlier, there's a number of people that have been asking about the vessel itself and the number of passengers. So we're working with Quark on this trip. Ocean Adventurer, which is our ship. It can accommodate 130 passengers or so.
I think so.
Which, as you say, Bret, is not a large vessel in this sort of arena. 130 passengers is fantastic because invariably there are a few people that will want to stay on board, aren't there? For one reason or another. Some people like to enjoy the scenery from the standpoint of the ship, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is quite nice. Maximum 10 on a Zodiac.
Typically
is what it would be.
Yeah,
that's about right.
Yeah,
generally speaking,
you have a guide at the back, obviously.
That's right.
In charge of the outboard. So
yeah, absolutely. So this particular vessel is just brilliantly set up for what we want to do. This is what it does. This is its bread and butter. Bret's done it. I've done it. Mark's done it many times, as have others that will be with us on the trip, and all of the guides and the naturalists on board the ship. So we've got a fantastic team, haven't we, on this trip? That should be really good. What's that?
Pretty enviable.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, indeed, absolutely. Do you want? Would it be a good idea? I think it probably would be a good idea to maybe describe, if you can, what a typical day would be. I mean, that's an almost impossible question to answer, so I do apologise. But
yeah, I mean,
they have a shape, though, don't they?
Yeah. So typically, what normally happens is you'll wake up in the morning, and
normally a good start.
Yeah, you have a relatively early start, and you'll have a morning activity, which is either a landing or a Zodiac cruise, something like that. And what it enables you to do is sort of get out when it's a little bit warmer, obviously, because first thing in the morning it can be pretty cold because the sun has dropped a little bit in the sky. And so it's sort of, the sun has built up a bit of heat and things like that, so it's a bit more comfortable if it's a colder day. You don't really want to be out at 3 a.m. because it can be pretty nippy, as well as obviously disturbing sleep patterns. So yeah, normally you go for a morning activity, then you come back and you will be able to have time on the vessel in the middle of the day, and then that might be that you're moving from one place to the next, for example, to make a different landing, and then in the afternoon hopefully you'll go to another area where you can have another activity. It might be on certain days that you are traveling slightly further distances, so it might be that you spend an afternoon cruising, but when you're cruising there is still an awful lot to see. But typically I've found that they nearly always try and do as much as they can overnight, because they can navigate all night. It's not an issue. So normally when you wake up in the morning, you are where you want to be, and it's not a problem. It's only if the ice decides to throw a spanner in the works that it might have to change a bit. But one of the important things to say is, don't take that for gospel, because if a polar bear is seen at 11 p.m. and you say that you are quite happy to be disturbed at 11 p.m, then someone will come quite often and wake you up if you're already asleep. Or there might even be a ship-wide alert to say something amazing is happening. You need to get out on deck as quickly as possible. So it's not unknown to see people in pajamas watching polar bears. That has been seen.
But isn't that a great thing, though? Isn't it when you're woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and see a bear? How cool is that?
So it is up to you. Obviously, you don't have to get up if you don't want to.
Quite.
But I mean, I think I came back from Svalbard exhausted because I spent as much time as I could out on the deck or on the bridge, or that's what was so special, was to be able to spend time out and just enjoying this amazing wilderness. It's a pretty unique experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth mentioning, John, you have posed this question, and one or two others have as well, about the facilities on board the ship. The ship is absolutely magnificent. It was refitted 3 or 4 years ago. It was a $5 million refit. It has a beautiful restaurant, and I can't remember if it has 2 bars or 3, but that's I just can't remember off the top of my head. But it's absolutely superb. It has a lovely library. It has beautiful viewing decks. It does also rather unusually have 2 jacuzzis on board, which are outside. And one of the polar bear sightings that I had when I was there, there were people actually, clearly not photographers in this case, Bret, but who were in the jacuzzi drinking, or rather toasting the polar bears from the jacuzzi with a glass of champagne.
Very civilized.
Which was very, very civilized indeed. But as I say, they obviously weren't photographers. But it's absolutely exceptional. And in terms of other facilities on board, it's superb. During the course of the trip, we will be doing presentations every day. I've absolutely no doubt that Bret will be presenting. I'm sure Mark will be presenting, and other of our colleagues, in addition to the team on board the ship. So the lounge area is really magnificent, with screens all around the lounge, as I say, and a very nice bar. There's food and drink available all day, tea and coffee facilities at various points on the ship available at all times. So if you fancy being out photographing wildlife at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're in dire need of a hot chocolate, you can pop back in and have a warming hot chocolate and then hop straight back out again.
I think that's one of the best things on board those ships, is when you get cold, you can just nip in and get a hot drink. Like, I think that's a massively understated bonus of these ships.
Absolutely. And Bret, worth just mentioning something about the polar bear side of things. I mean, of course, all the guides are on board the ship, are trained to deal with polar bears. So
I mean, polar bears are, it's really important to say, polar bears are the only land mammal that literally sees humans as food. So it's really important to listen to the guides, obviously, and they'll never put you in harm's way, obviously, but polar bears, you have to respect them. Some of them will run away at high speed if they see you. Some are very relaxed, some are very inquisitive. So you have to go with the expert's guidance as to exactly how to behave. Also, it's important to say that the guides will be armed. So don't be alarmed if you see someone walking around with a shotgun on their shoulder, or a rifle. They're not there for you. It's purely as a last resort. But it's important to let you know, because it does freak some people out the first time they see it. But I was speaking to the guides, and they very, very, very rarely ever have to do anything like that. And usually when they do, they fire one shot in the air and the bear runs off in the opposite direction at high speed. So, but in terms of sightings with bears, you can literally see them at any time, anywhere, on the ice, on the land, in the water, even swimming. They can swim 50 to 100 miles a day. So, they're a huge mammal. And, when you're on land and you see a polar bear print, that's when you get an idea of just how huge they are. If you don't see one when you think you're going to see one, don't be alarmed, because you might turn around the corner and there's one just stood watching you on the boat as you're approaching. So that's one of the great things I think about these cruises, is you just never know what's going to show up and when. There's always something to surprise you.
Well, especially if you've got 24-hour daylight, as you say, it makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So Amanda has asked when the best time to go is. Well, of course, that's our summer months. And how many days most trips are. Well, they vary, don't they? Anything between a week long and I don't know, 2 weeks long, really.
Yeah, I mean, the shortest one I think is like 4 or 5 days, and people literally go from Longyearbyen, they go up the northwest coast, and they just come back again. If you're doing a circumnavigation, typically it's 7, 8 days, something like that. If you're doing trying to go around Nordaustlandet and doing all the sort of really remote stuff, then you're probably looking at 14 days, something like that. But typically the 7, 8 day mark is a really good amount of time to see all the best bits, basically.
Yes. And our Festival of Wildlife trip, so it's 10 days from the UK back to the UK. We spend the first night at a hotel in Oslo, an airport hotel in Oslo, which is extremely nice. And then we have a private charter from Oslo directly up to Longyearbyen. And then we are 8 nights aboard the Ocean Adventurer. So that is all on our website. which you'll find there. Stephanie's asked about kayaking. I might perhaps answer that, Bret, which is simply to say that we do have a kayaking program for our Festival of Wildlife trip. So yes, there will be a chance of kayaking. We haven't promoted that yet. We will do that a little bit closer to departure, but you will be advised about the kayaking opportunities, and the kayaking is absolutely fantastic. But it's certainly worth taking a camera, video, GoPro, and so on. But the kayaking is absolutely superb. It's really wonderful kayaking in these polar waters because absolutely anything can turn up. It's very exciting. So yes, there is plenty of opportunity to kayak. So Bret, I think. One final question. I think I'm conscious. I'm a little bit conscious of time now.
Yeah.
But one. Perhaps one or two final questions. You showed a super photograph. One of your first photos was a photograph of a ship with the blue whale in front of it.
Yeah.
One or two people have asked whether there are other cetaceans that they might be able to see in this area, and is there a chance of narwhal?
Narwhal, very unlikely, and the reason is narwhal basically stay with the pack ice. So 95% of their life is spent in and around the pack ice. So unless you spend a prolonged period there, the chances are pretty slim. There are other cetaceans that you are probably definitely going to see are humpbacks in large numbers at times. And you can see fin whale as well, quite commonly up there. It's not unheard of. It just depends on what's around at the time you are there. Literally, it can be very varied, the cetacean life. You can get belugas if you're lucky.
Yeah, we had fantastic sightings of belugas when we.
It's just dependent on if they're in the spot you're in, and the belugas obviously like rivers, fjords and things like that because of the meltwater and stuff like that, all the nutrients, and so they fish around, looking at the edge of glaciers and things like that. So the belugas you usually find particularly around large glaciers and those sorts of areas. So if you're out at sea, you're not going to see them. You have to be close to shore usually to get a good sighting of belugas. But you really just don't know what's going to turn up. Killer whales have been seen before. I haven't seen them, but orca are a possibility. You just don't know. So you've got to really just lap it up, whatever decides to show itself. I mean, even bowheads have been seen, but you just can't say whether they're going to be there at that time or not. So it's all to do with ice, currents. There's so many different factors involved. And obviously the jet stream plays a massive difference as well because it moves up and down a lot. So it can change weather patterns and you really don't know. It's hard to say. And that has a major effect on plankton blooms and all that sort of stuff. So,
but hey, it's another, you're more likely to see more again because it's 24-hour daylight and we've always got people on the lookout.
I mean, I think I saw humpbacks every single day to give you an idea. So I saw blue whales, I think 3 times in the end. I saw fin whales a lot. I didn't see belugas, but that's just the way it goes. But then I saw, I think 14 different polar bears, so had some amazing sightings with the Arctic fox and the walruses, you really can't complain.
There's so much, isn't there?
And to be able to go to like Wallenberg Fjord and that fjord that nobody else had really been to on one of these style ships was pretty special as well, because it really does feel like an expedition. You're exploring somewhere new, and that's all part of the fun of it. You just don't know what's going to happen.
And it's fair to say that every day is different, isn't it? Every single day is different. You don't know what's going to turn up.
The landscape changes minutely as well. One minute you feel like you're on the moon, and then the next minute you feel like you're sort of surrounded by the Alps, and then you've got the most amazing glaciers. It's incredible. It's just so varied and beautiful.
So look, like I say, I'm conscious of time. It's 20 to 9. These wonderful people have been with us for an extended period now. Bret, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. I'll just read out a couple of comments that we've had in chat from Brian. Really looking forward to joining you next year after 2 full starts. Brian, we're looking forward to you joining us as well, and we're looking forward to getting there. And from Peter, thank you for another great presentation, Bret. I'm looking forward to going back there, and fingers crossed it's third time lucky for this trip. Well, we couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
So look, a bit of a promotion for the next two presentations. Next two presentations. 14th of July, a lunchtime talk. Sarah Malcolm's going to be talking about Sri Lanka. And if you want to see even more of Bret and photography, you can join Bret next week. And me, I think, although you won't be looking at my photographs, but anyway, you can join Bret and I when Bret will be showing some photographs of something completely different, which is Kenya, I think I'm right in saying, isn't it, Bret?
It is indeed.
Nice one. Okay, I look forward to that very much. Bret, thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.